All right, it is noon sharp, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. It means a ton that you have chosen to spend this time with us, especially for a conversation this is as complex and necessary as this one. So, I want to begin by acknowledging that today is Juneteenth, a day of reflection on liberation, resistance, and the work of building a more just world. And I'm really grateful to be having this conversation in that spirit. So, welcome. My name is Rachel Bowling, and I am a graduate student in the Addiction Policy and Practice program at Georgetown University. This panel is part of my capstone project, which explores how faith-based spaces, such as churches, temples, and mosques, can become inclusive, culturally competent partners in recovery from substance use disorder for LGBTQ plus individuals and people who use drugs, and particularly during a time when these communities are being actively excluded from resources and targeted for persecution. Very brief bit about myself and my reason for pursuing this project. Often our areas of interest, I've found, are sort of flagrant displays of our own life experiences, chosen or otherwise. And I'm no exception. So I knew that I was gay from a very young age, grew up in a small Christian town, and, despite the exclusion that I experienced, I always felt innately and intuitively drawn to the sacred. I always craved spiritual connection. Two, I'm a person in long-term recovery. Professionally, I have my undergraduate degree in philosophy and religion from San Francisco State. I am also a veteran, and I have over 7 years in behavioral health direct service, spanning substance use disorder counseling, harm reduction-based rehousing, street crisis response, and a number of other things. I also most recently was a public health advisor with SAMHSA before being put on administrative leave by an administration that is demonstrably hostile to evidence-based practices, queer community, and people who use drugs. But enough about me and a little bit about the panel. So this panel will help to shape two components of my capstone project, a public-facing toolkit and a draft city ordinance, which I have entitled the Community Sanctuary Partnership Ordinance, about which I will say more later in our conversation. And while this project is part of my graduate work, it is informed and enriched by people who've been doing this work on the ground, in policy, in ministry, and in recovery spaces for years. And I'm joined today by four incredible panelists whose work spans harm reduction, clergy leadership, national advocacy, and recovery movement building. And I will offer brief introductions for each of our panelists, about whom I could say a ton more because they are wonderful, as a way of honoring the paths that brought them here and the insights that they'll be sharing with us today. So, first, I'm happy to introduce you to the Reverend Jan Brown. Jan is the founder and executive director of SpiritWorks Foundation Center for the Soul, an ordained deacon in the Episcopal Church. She currently serves as the Archdeacon of the Diocese of Southern Virginia. Jan holds a Master of Science degree in Addiction Studies from the International Program on Addiction Studies, a joint program of King's College London, the University of Adelaide, and Virginia Commonwealth University. In 2022, Jan was inducted into the Hall of Fame of the Museum of African American Addictions Treatment and Recovery in recognition of her outstanding contributions and leadership in the field. Jan, I'm really, really thrilled to have you here. We also have Hill Brown, who is based in Western North Carolina and is the Southern Director of Faith and Harm Reduction, a justice movement which connects people who use drugs, people who do sex work, and communities of faith through the development of harm reduction-centered spiritual resources, ritual support, and spiritual care. Hill led a community-based harm reduction program in Asheville, North Carolina until 2021. They now serve as a community chaplain at a free cafe in Asheville. Born and raised in Alabama, Hill is committed to speaking about and directly addressing the particular ways that gentrification and displacement, racial capitalism, and the war on people who use drugs manifest in the southern United States. Very stoked you're here, Hill. We also have Stephanie Campbell, who began her advocacy work with ActUp, the grassroots organization that empowered people to fight back against health discrimination through direct action, partnerships with government, and public health experts to end the AIDS pandemic. She is the Senior Vice President for Kent Strategic Advisors, a member of the SAMHSA Harm Reduction Steering Committee, and a national drug policy advocate. Hey, Stephanie, very glad you're here. And we have Ed Chinery. Ed has been an actor, dancer, writer, and health and welfare benefits specialist in local government for almost 30 years. As of Juneteenth, 2010, very happy anniversary, Ed. He has been an Episcopalian priest. He currently serves in parish ministry with an amazing faith community at Church of the Ascension on Fifth Avenue and 10th Street in Manhattan, where he's engaged in outreach and community relations as well as pastoral care and worship. He is also the clergy liaison to the NYPD 6th Precinct. So, thank you all so much for being here and for the work you do in this space. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to offer a few opening remarks to frame the purpose of today's panel and why this moment at this intersection feels so urgent. So, we are holding this conversation at a critical political and cultural moment for our communities. Across the country, resources are being pulled from people who need them most, especially queer folks, people who use drugs, and especially our trans family. Just yesterday, the Supreme Court upheld Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for minors, legislating what should be private, respected decisions made between doctor and patient. Almost simultaneously, HHS ordered the shutdown of a suicide prevention hotline for LGBTQ youth. And at the federal level, the administration has removed or buried LGBTQ plus specific resources from agency websites, including pages related to health, suicide prevention, civil rights protections, and youth support services. And Christianity is being co-opted toward these ends. The administration has attempted to reframe religious liberty as grounds for denying LGBTQ plus people access to services, healthcare, and adoption. And emboldened by this political climate, the Southern Baptist Convention, excuse me, America's largest Protestant denomination, has officially called for the overturning of the Supreme Court's decision legalizing same-sex marriage. Meanwhile, overdose rates continue to rise, especially in communities already isolated or politically targeted. And in recent months, we've seen significant rollbacks in public health funding for people who use drugs, including the defunding of syringe service programs, restrictions on federal harm reduction grants, and increased political pressure on states to shift resources away from evidence-based care. That is all a lot. And yet, in the face of these rollbacks, queer people and people who use drugs continue to survive, to care for each other, and to build sacred spaces of our own. Our resilience is matched only by the deep need for institutional courage, especially among our faith communities. And one of the most striking things to me about this intersection of queerness, recovery, and spirituality, is what we all have in common, which is our ubiquity, right? Queer people are everywhere. People who use drugs are everywhere, and churches are everywhere. And that shared presence across geography, culture, and context creates a profound opportunity for cooperation and collaboration. And some faith communities are already doing this work, offering meals, distributing naloxone, providing spiritual care without shame or precondition. And this project aims to ask, how can those who are already engaged in this work continue to do it with more protections and more support? And it also asks, how can we invite more churches, mosques, synagogues, and spiritual homes into this work? And importantly, not through guilt, but through shared values of inclusion, hospitality, and healing. So that's part of the vision behind the Community Sanctuary Partnership Ordinance, a draft city policy that would allow faith-based institutions to opt in as public health partners with protections like zoning flexibility and limited liability for harm reduction activities. It's inspired not only by public health frameworks, but by scriptural traditions that call on us to care for the poor, the sick, and the marginalized. And at its heart, it aims to give churches the freedom and opportunity to be what they were always meant to be, which is a place of sanctuary for those who need it most. And with that framing in mind, I would love to stop talking and turn it over to our panelists to begin the conversation. So I would love to start with some of the tensions and truths at the heart of that issue. And I should say too that for those who are joining us, if you have questions, just submit them in the chat, and we'll have 15 minutes at the end where we'll address as many as we can. So first question, and whoever feels most called, please just jump in. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced at the intersection of queer identity, spirituality, and recovery?
I'll go ahead and start. And thank you so much, Rachel, for your work in this area. It's been an honor and a privilege to learn from you, and also gratitude to Georgetown and to the O'Neill Institute for its groundbreaking spearheading with the addiction policy work and the program. And a special shout out to Regina. Thank you, Regina. Um, I've been thinking a lot about the intersectionality of not just queerness, but addiction, and I've been thinking back on, you know, um, uh, my early days in ActUp and how tied to advocacy my recovery has been. And the reason for that is because we're the same group of people, right? When the AIDS epidemic um, was ravishing our communities, and the government was essentially saying that AIDS was God's response to abominations like gay people and homosexuality, not to even mention the trans world. Um, it was the same group that who we are now. It was queer folks, it's BIPOC folks, folks who engage in sex work for survival and other and fun. Folks that you know um, have been demonized in one way or another, and also poor folks. We don't often talk about by these issues. And so it's the same story, right? Repackaged. And I remember during that period thinking that we were pushing the boulder up, like Sisyphus, right? We were never going to be recognized, we were never going to be cared for, we were never going to get the help that we needed. And yet there came a tipping point. And part of that tipping point was when allies really stepped into the space and started sharing their stories as parents, as loved ones, as community members, as neighbors, um, so um, and when you were going through the list of challenges currently, and all those challenges are real, I also have such a sense of hope and commitment and fierceness to our community, because this is not new for us. And we not only have survived, but we've thrived. And so the building of community and connection, Rachel, we talked about this, that Sam Quinones's quote, I've held it close to my heart, that the antidote, what he says to naloxone, but I say to addiction and to the pain and suffering that our communities have experienced, is community and connection, right? That's the spiritual, fierceness that we have, is community and connection. And so, um, you know, so the fact that we have these ongoing issues, um, all serves as a jumping off point for us to recommit and to focus, and to link up, link arms, and do the work, do the work. So that's I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. You've reminded me of a couple things. One of them being, so I read a couple days ago, I wish I could remember to whom I should credit it, but a resistance member said, our resistance cannot be predicated upon winning, right? Like we have to continue to show up regardless. And I think, as you and I have talked about, Stephanie, it does sort of feel like having to go back out into the garage and fish out the old tools and be like, okay, well, here we go again. But yeah, if anyone else has anything they would like to touch on.
Yeah, it's actually, I'd like to kind of piggyback on both of what you guys are saying. I like what you just said, Rachel, because it reminds me of immediate shortly after George Floyd, we began a racial justice study and discussion group. And we brought in a whole bunch of heavy hitters, Kelly Brown Douglas, Stephanie Spellers, those kinds of people. And we learned an awful lot. And our group is still in place these 5 years later. And one of the things that was very helpful for us to learn was that we may never arrive. We may never get to the place of completion or complete fruition when it comes to racial justice. So that informs our work and gives us permission on some level. But I kind of also wanted to circle back to your initial question about one of, or maybe the greatest challenge. Has to do with what you mentioned in your kind of intro about, I don't want to demonize the Southern Baptist Convention, but that element of Christian nationalism, that way of thinking is one of the greatest barriers. If the antidote to SUD or naloxone or whatever is community and connection, our challenge is how to continually, gracefully form community and connection, even in the face of this sort of mammoth spiritual presence that would have us believe otherwise, that would have us enter into their construct of God being this great punisher that we all have to appease somehow. When actually, that's sort of like the fake Christianity. The real Christianity has much more to do with, well, when Jesus says the two greatest commandments are love God and love neighbor and self equally, I figured that if they're the greatest, that's the lens we go to first to look through when we interpret everything from scripture to how we create community and connection. And in the end, it turns out that loving neighbor and self equally is the only means we have available to love God. So the biggest barrier for us, for you, Rachel, in going forward with this incredibly important and wonderful and loving project, is to, I guess, realize that that's kind of what we're up against and not devolve into retaliatory thinking, energy, and behavior, and just continue to do what Stephanie was saying that gives so much hope. So that's kind of the contribution I wanted to make at that point.
Thank you, Ed. I am reminded too of the conversations that we've had around your practice of nonviolent communication and how much admiration I have for your ability to maintain, or to fidelity to that. And despite
It's
the
really hard. It's really hard. Like, if you saw the movie Ruskin, there was that moment where he said, if you take a nonviolent position, you must always be prepared to get punched in the face. Nonviolence is wonderful in the abstract. It's a great, but in practice, what does it do? It leaves you with some very uncomfortable feelings sometimes to try to navigate.
Mm-hmm. And that's funny that you say that, Ed, because one of my comments was that we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I know for me that has become the charge again. My admiration for folks like Stephanie and Tom Hill, who are kind of folks that I look up to from ActUp and back in the day, and for me, really joining the movement around the time of the Names Project, and out of that grew SpiritWorks, and so it was kind of the space that I grew up in. And so SpiritWorks has become kind of an outgrowth of that. And
one of the challenges that I've experienced personally and certainly witnessed in some of the pockets where these aren't the major issues or the driving forces, is to get out of my comfort zone and really get back there on the streets, because in my faith tradition I was allowed to get married and to get married in the church where I serve, and um, we've got LGBTQ folks all throughout our religion, and we do harm reduction, so we do a lot of those things where I am, and so being able to go, okay, well, we need to take what we do out into the streets. And when I got up this morning, I was thinking about back in the day, the slogan, we're here, we're queer. And we need to dust that one off and add to it and get back out there again. So, and we know how to do it. I mean, I really appreciated what you were saying, Stephanie, because this isn't new. Some of it may be repackaged by others, but we know how to do this. We are built for this time. And so, for me, again, showing up and being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Thank you, Jan. Any other thoughts on question one?
Can you ask the question again, Rachel?
Absolutely. As many times as you need. What are some of the challenges you've experienced at the intersection of queer identity, spirituality, and recovery?
Yeah, I think that the big hurdle is for me in my work, um, is how deeply we've misinterpreted biblical text, how much work has to be done to reinterpret. We already know that what we consume does not defile us. It's in the text. But we've gotten some really toxic purity narratives from white supremacist culture that we've laid on top of the Bible, and it just makes it really hard to do the work. So I think much of what I'm doing when I'm going into churches is to say, we've gotten this really wrong, and folks need repair, and you have to do it. There's reparation that needs to happen to folks who use drugs, and to queer folks who use drugs, and to Black folks who have used drugs. And we know that the war on people who use drugs, and we don't use drug war language. We say it's a war on people who use drugs. We don't fight wars on inanimate objects. But these communities have taken the brunt. And so the church must do repair, because it's our toxic misinterpretation of text that's resulted in all of this language about, when folks don't use drugs, they're clean. That means when people use drugs, they're dirty. So I think that defilement piece is just really huge.
Thank you so much for that. And if you don't mind, I want to, um, I'm recalling a conversation that we had where you spoke on the damaging nature of conversion narratives in faith-based spaces, particularly with regard to people who use drugs, right? Like, you come in dirty and then you're clean, and how that can set people up who reinitiate use for really disastrous outcomes. And I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit on that before I move us on to our next question.
Yeah, I mean, it's always sort of interesting for me to watch how totally parallel a sobriety narrative is with a Christian conversion narrative. That you were bad and troubled, and you used drugs, and then you found recovery, and now you're fixed, and you're all better, and you're a good person now. And I think the danger for that, one, it's very black and white, but two, is that if you reinitiate use, then how do you feel about yourself? And I don't think it's good. I don't think we have an eye to mental health and to suicidality when we teach people to construct their narrative in that way. Because when you reinitiate use, then you feel like a total failure, and that can't happen. So I think we need to work on that piece. And queer people experience this too, right? And we know this from the very existence of conversion therapy. It's like you would be better if you were not here. You would somehow be closer to God if you would lay this part of your life down, you know? And so we just gotta stop that, like you're here and you're here when the human life is so complex and has all kinds of different bumps and whatever.
Yeah, thank you so much for elaborating on that. Did anybody want to respond at all? Also, y'all can just like jump in. I don't need to like prompt everybody to talk. So I'm hearing a lot, and I appreciate that I'm hearing a lot about resilience, right? Like that there is a sort of through line of that throughout our community and throughout various myriad colorful challenges. And so I'm wondering now, in sort of, the opposite side of that coin, um, how have you seen that resilience translate into recovery success or community transformation with specific regard to queer identity, and communities of people who use drugs?
I think, thank God for my first sponsor. Thank God for my first meeting, um, where I was actively using drugs. I could not get through the hour. I had to go to the bathroom, boot up in the bathroom, and the folks in the room. I often say that, that the 12-step community that I got involved in, they were the first harm reduction connection that I had because they said, "Let us love you until you learn how to love yourself." And thank God for that. My first sponsor, Mecca, said to me, because um, I was really confused around the serenity prayer. Like, like I can't just give up and roll over, like I need to fight back because I know what it's like to have to trade sex for, the day's meal or a place to sleep or, as a kid. I knew all of that. And Mecca said to me, girl, um, recovery doesn't say we got to roll over and, and submit. Quite the opposite. Recovery said to us, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to our community, to be of service, to be a voice for those people. And if God gave you a voice, then you get out there and you use that voice. And I think that's an opportunity that resilience was not just about like rolling over, and getting, and not using, and that it was a process for me. I think there's an underlying unspoken piece though that we have, and I love that Hill touched on this, which is we internalize the negative public perceptions about our the stigma. We internalize the stigma, and there were a number of years that I didn't use drugs, and then one day I did, you know, and I remember trying to drown myself in the bathtub because I was so afraid to come back to the rooms. And thank God I had people who were like, whatever negativity that you've internalized or that you've heard, what a gift that you can, rejoin the community, be a part of, and get back on the, on the road to healing. And so I think part of our work needs to go beyond just our spaces wherever we go in terms of our recovery, but we have to carry that message out into the world. When I was working on marriage equality, I had this guy come up to me and he was screaming obscenities, and he screamed in my face, and he was like spitting, when people get really mad and they start spitting, and he was like spitting in my face. It's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And instead of my flexing, which I wanted to do, like I was like, I'm human, something came over me, and I believe it was my higher power. My higher power was like, and I looked at this guy and I saw a hurt person. I saw a wound. I said, and I said to this guy, I said, I'm sorry for whoever hurt you. and I'm going to pray that you get some healing. And I didn't say it in a snarky, Queenie way. I was like, I really meant it. I felt it. And the guy didn't know what to do, right? He was expecting me to flex. I didn't flex. I shared with him love. And I think that's the part. And my brother Ed here, who does so much work on the nonviolence piece, like that is transformative when we can react, in that healing love and carry the message of hope and healing instead of raging back.
Thank you. As you've been speaking, I've been thinking that what you're touching on is uh, a sort of an energetic aspect of the human condition. Let me see if I can roll this out for you. I'm in the middle of writing a sermon for Sunday. The gospel lesson happened to be about the guy who was possessed by demons. And Jesus ultimately sends the demons into a herd of swine and they throw themselves off a cliff. But what happens is the townspeople come and ask Jesus to please leave because they're afraid now. And what this nonviolent school of theology I study with suggests is that the people reject Jesus because he has removed their scapegoat. And the whole discussion theologically is about the usefulness, if you will, of a scapegoat in human communities. It's and this is what will help us move forward in this work as well, is to come to a deeper realization of when we are scapegoating, when we are working to perpetuate distancing. And I think what winds up happening in this particular gospel story is that they try to throw Jesus off the cliff, and instead he departs. And what is left, the resonance that is left, is now they have to find their way in the absence of a scapegoat. So I think that could be a layer of helpful reflection that will help us as we move forward in this kind of work to experience ourselves and to communicate in external sense as well. Does that make any sense? Because the scapegoating is about, queer people as well as people who use drugs. And we apparently are performing a very valuable function for certain elements in society who can measure themselves against us. It's a false measurement, of course. I think that what we are faced with is the very kind of the arc of justice is long, but it bends toward, I'm misquoting MLK. It is a lifetime of work. It's it's a commitment that again, going back to Kelly Brown Douglas, we may never arrive, but that does not mean that we are allowed to stop doing what we're doing.
Well, and along that vein, I got into recovery when I was 22, and so my entire adult life has been spent in recovery and doing advocacy work, and um, being in the rooms as a young person, brown person, queer person, female, wasn't easy back in the late 80s, and I brought myself with me, and a lot of what showed up was, a lack of humility, and but the old timers, continued to tell me to keep coming back, and that continues to be a message that I offer to others, right? You just got to show up, and we just got to keep showing up. That's where the magic happens, and that's when the miracles happen. And even through these past 38 years, people say, gosh, you're you're doing it, why do you continue to participate? And for me, somebody was there when I got here. And so, I have a responsibility to show up for those who were there for me when I arrived. And these days it doesn't feel so much like a burden or a responsibility. I look forward to it. And it's taken the time it has taken for me to look forward to it. And then, bookending with that, with considering, having had that spiritual experience or ongoing spiritual awakenings, right? I now have a message of hope and healing that I can share with other people. And that certainly hasn't always been the case. That message of hope and healing has changed through the years. It's strengthened, and I think for me, it's really supported by community, and bigger than community, it's a sense of belonging. Oftentimes we talk about finding our people and finding our tribe, or whatever that case may be, our family, or family of choice or of heart. And I think that really allows me, personally, professionally, vocationally, to continue to get up and to show up and to carry messages of hope and healing. And so having that safe place and safe space and safe people out of which to be inspired to do the work that God is calling me to do, is, for me, it's like it doesn't get much better than that, to be able to be privileged to be able to do this work.
Thank
Thank you. Just one last point. I wrote down, Rachel, when you were giving us an intro, not through guilt. And I think that is an aspect that will most helpfully be incorporated into the guiding spirit of this kind of work. And building on kind of what Jan was just talking about, um, we there is sort of a hopeful resonance that is positive and energizing, and I I don't know, could be a doorway onto doing this kind of work, the kind of work where we are naming when scapegoating is happening, but doing so without punishment. Um, every aspect of how we enter into heal must be devoid of retaliation, because otherwise we're just perpetuating cycles of violence in thinking and speaking and behavior. So, and we need each other. In the people in this room, we need each other to be reminded of these things and to continue to shape ideas and processes and experiences. So, and to draw upon the sort of legitimate interpretation of aspects of faith experience, whether it's scripture or any other kind of aspect of faith community. So sorry, that's all I want to say.
You never have to apologize. Yeah, thank you both. So this feels like a solid transition. So I want to talk a little bit about the policy proposal itself. And as I mentioned, it's a draft. It includes, or it allows faith-based institutions to opt in as public health partners. And that includes limited liability protections for activities like harm reduction, meal distribution, to include, needle exchange, naloxone distribution, and importantly, cultural competency training. And also importantly, zoning flexibility to allow services to take place on site. And actually, transparently, I got the idea for this in conversation with Hill, who mentioned sort of offhandedly and just said, I wish that right now churches could be a place of sanctuary for folks. Like that would just, that would be great. And my little brain went, well, immediately it went back to the Disney movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, because that was my really only familiarity with with sanctuary as a concept. Doesn't exist legally anymore. That's fine. It hasn't been a thing since like the 1600s. Not a big deal. But this policy was basically as close as I could get legally to making that happen. And so with that in mind, and I hope you had a chance to look it over. If not, just, you can riff it. But what parts of this policy or this idea more generally do you think work? And what do you think should be challenged or reconsidered? And then I would love to talk to you a little bit after that or now about challenges to the implementation, which I know some of you have already experienced intimately in your own organizations. So I would love to hear from you all. You've been doing this work for a long time and have so much wisdom and insight. So any thoughts are welcome.
I think the strength of this, Rachel, is the built-in framework for partnership. And that's essential. It's it's in lockstep with what we've been talking about, right? It's not just on a micro level that we engage in community and connection, which is spiritual healing, right? But it's on a community level. It's on the meso and the macro level. And so having having regulations, right? Having mandates, having ordinances, legal justifications for doing this work and a framework for this partnership to happen is absolutely critical. Where I think we often fall short in whatever advocacy work we do is when we don't do that relationship building. All of life is relationships. It's all about relationships. And so your ordinance really kind of spells the how to do that and the who to do that with very nicely. The challenge, I think, is going to be in those spaces that are so reactive right now. And the reactivity, and I've had conversations, it's really interesting. I've had conversations with people recently where several years ago, we seemed to be very much on the same page with rights, right? Human rights. And, even and I've worked on both sides of the aisle, right? So, the Republicans, I'm just going to say it, were often the leads for, government get out of my bedroom and the pulpit, right? Like that was kind of a cornerstone. And in some of the work that I've done in the past, I had some strong connections with some government folks who understood that everybody should have, as Americans, should have the rights and abilities that go with being Americans. But and President Obama said it really powerful. Former President Obama said it really powerfully. He was talking about the ways in which, it used to be that we had we had Walter Cronkite to listen to. We had trusted sources of information that we were all kind of on the same page. And now there's been sort of a fragmentation of information. We don't know who to trust. And so part of our work is going to be, building collaborations and partnerships with folks and, changing the hearts and minds through, through education, through, sharing our stories. Jan and I, in our work with Faces and Voices, we often talk, in terms of our voices have power, right? Our faces and voices have power. So our personal stories have power. The challenge is going to be, for those communities in which even the most basic harm reduction and recovery support services are viewed as enabling. I'm going to use that word. That those, basic harm reduction and recovery supports and services, are not in my backyard. I don't want to have that here. Um, and so that's going to be what we're going to need to be strategic about. How do we change the hearts and minds, you know, and not just give up when we face those barriers.
I'll jump in. A couple of things that came to mind when I was looking at the question earlier, and just even thinking about, going back to what Ed was talking about, the two greatest commandments, right? Love God, love your neighbor. I then say, well, who's your neighbor? Everybody. And also thinking about, it's biblical to talk about sanctuary cities. I mean, it's scriptural. And so, for certainly in the Old Testament as well as in the New Testament. I mean, there was refuge. There were cities that were set up, for people. I think about, the community of Acts. So it's not a foreign concept. I mean, it's like what Hill was talking about earlier. It's about, okay, let's go back and actually take a look at what Scripture really says. Um, Acknowledging at the same time that, okay, what happened to this person, as Dr. Perry would say, that this, and then Jan Speak comes in, of course, that this is the best that they can do, right? So I start off very graciously and end up as myself. And recently I had the opportunity, and I was a little anxious and nervous to go to far Southwest Virginia, and had been brought in by a very conservative church coalition, and they wanted to know how to do better work. And I thought, okay, come on, God, really? I'm black. I'm a female. I'm queer. What on earth? They're going to run me out of town. Um, and so, I really prayed about it, and I talked to my colleagues about it, and I kept thinking, okay, they're going to change their mind at any minute. We're going to get on Zoom and we'll have some meetings before I go, and they're going to say no. I mean, every step of the way I was waiting for the no, and parts of me at times were hoping for the no, because I couldn't see it. And it was one of the most amazing experiences that I've had recently. And a lot of it was finding shared and common ground, things that we could agree upon. And while they were, I remember thinking we could all at least agree on the fact that naloxone wasn't enabling people to use drugs. And this one gentleman, the whole time we were sitting at this table, and he had his Bible in front of him, and that was his thing, that this is an abomination, and he would go on and on. And so I really did think I had him when I said, well, gosh, we don't want people to die. And he was okay with people dying. And I thought, whoa, okay, I gotta figure something else out, and so I just sat with that for a few minutes, and what we could agree upon was that we didn't want people to die alone. And I thought, gosh, if that's where we have to start, um, I can begin there. But I mean, again, I wasn't prepared for folks to be so okay with people dying. And even through the years, recognizing some of my own bias, my bias forever had been to recovery, right? And so people would say, and I said, it's like we need naloxone because, people who, die can't recover. And one day I heard myself say that, and I thought, well, people who die can't be moms or dads or siblings or, and so ever since then, was have been able to kind of reshape that. And, yes, there are people who are going for whom recovery is meaningful, and there are also people who want to use drugs and have every right to continue to do so. And so those partnerships that Stephanie was talking about, and really being able to figure out, what is common ground, or what is common, holy, sacred ground, as we're talking to people in faith communities, and really saying, okay, what does this book actually say? It says sanctuary cities are a thing. It says we take care of one another, and so and being okay with not coming to full agreement. Those people have asked me to come back. They've friended me on Facebook, so it's like now they get to see my beautiful children. I mean, it's all, really disorganizing for them, and they get to figure that out, because the reciprocity that exists, I have something they need, and want. And clearly they must have something that I want and need. And so what can we each bring to bear, so this relationship can bear fruit?
Yeah, I think Rachel, as I look at, and I'm sorry that my video is going in and out. It's raining here, and I live in an area that's heavily impacted by Helene, and we still don't have stable internet 8 months later. So, um, yeah, I think when I look at the zoning piece of the ordinance, yeah, was the executive director for a syringe access program in Asheville, North Carolina called Steady Collective. We were the only syringe exchange in the state to ever receive a zoning violation. And what that zoning violation said was that we were running a homeless shelter, which was such a peculiar statement because the site that was receiving that violation, we were there for like 2 hours, and it was like a pop-up. Like we didn't rent the space. We were just allowed to set up in this bookstore for a few hours every Tuesday. And zoning has often been used to run out people who are perceived as being undesirable, and it's a thing we don't talk enough about. We talk about policing a lot, but we need to talk more about carcerality in general and the ways that manifest in city code, um, because the enforcement arm of the zoning team is like hidden, right? It's so professional, it's so clean, but it was really dangerous for us, and it was really dangerous for the folks we were serving. And that was in an area of town that was highly gentrified, but it was also the area, and I mean, these are correlated because we know loss of housing is positively correlated with reinitiation of use, that the OD rate was just epic there. We needed to be there more than any other part of town, but we that was the place they most didn't want to see us because they needed this progress to just continue uninterrupted. And the presence of people who use drugs really messed up that whole we're in Disney World, all is well, tourist economy vibe. And so I think an ordinance change like this is really essential because harm reduction programs just keep running into this mess. And people who use drugs are going to keep running into this mess because we don't perceive people who use drugs as part of the community. And I think you can go to a community meeting and hear people talk and say, this is unsafe for our community. Who is your community? What does the word mean? It's like who is your neighbor? The word community can be used in the same sort of toxic way. Somebody's in it, somebody's out of it. And the irony, of course, was always that all of our sites, the folks we served mostly walked there. So how could they walk to a site if they're not part of it? Yeah.
I like what you're saying because it's who's our community? Well, it's not them.
Mhm.
And that's the whole, interweaving in a very subtle way of all the scapegoating and how important it is. And so weird because what you're talking about is this. It's really important for us to have a scapegoat, because we're not them. And yet something about preserving our identity as not them is what stands in the way of the whole loving neighbor as self thing that really does want to happen.
Mhm.
So I think that wittingly or unwittingly, we as human beings find ourselves working to perpetuate that kind of barrier.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a really awkward process at first. Um,
And
I,
why do we need to do it, Ed? If we are if nothing we do can separate us from the love of God, then we don't really need to have an
well,
other.
and that's where the Christian national way of thinking comes in. Well, we're just doing God's work by excluding them.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
So it's this really, I don't know, convoluted and unhealthy interpretation of God's purpose as, as it is expressed in even Jewish and Christian scriptures. So and it's both exciting and super daunting to be at this point on the verge of taking that expression to a broader level. Because I think that's what we're interested in doing and making it okay somehow. This is not about us doing the work of interrogation in order to alienate folks who are kind of stuck in a cycle of misinterpretation. It's about, one of the most exciting parts of this work, although it does not align very closely with sort of the American work ethic, which is, develop a plan, roll it out, and succeed. This is a much softer kind of thing. It means changing human nature on some level, which is, I think, kind of what Jesus was about, but never using shame and retaliation and punishment. There was a question that came up a moment ago about, so what does that look like in faith community? I didn't get the entire question, but I just wonder if that's something to touch upon at this juncture in the conversation. Unless Rachel, you may have a different idea.
No, no, no. I think it's a wonderful transition point. I just wanted to um harken back for a moment to Hill's point about zoning. And I remember you sharing that when you had followed up and said, well, this must be a mistake. Like, we're not a homeless shelter. We don't do this thing. And they said, well, it's not really about who you're, it's not about what you're doing. It's about who you're serving. And just kind of said that quiet part out loud. So thank you again for touching on that and the importance of yeah, getting in front of the sort of bureaucratic barriers to care that exist largely under the surface. So, but yeah, I think that's a phenomenal transition point, and I can read the question out loud too, and then whomever would like to respond, please feel free. Sarah asked, "What does the work physically look like in getting churches and spiritual spaces to open up their resources and minds? How would one know it's truly a safe space?"
Hill, would you start us off? Because I think what you're doing is pretty amazing. And then I know some of the work that we do is I think is pretty phenomenal in kind of what it looks like. But I was really intrigued earlier when we were introducing ourselves. So selfishly, I'd love to hear from you.
Oh, thanks, Jan. Yeah, so I work for Faith and Harm Reduction, and Faith and Harm Reduction makes connections between faith-based communities, so multi-religious, and harm reduction programs, really for the benefit of both parties. And there's a lot of educational work with faith-based communities. And then, we want those spaces that are more resourced to support harm reduction programs, which typically haven't received support from faith-based communities. It's mostly been a space for AA. So trying to do that work and also provide spiritual care for folks who use drugs from a real harm reduction orientation. So that mostly looks like accompaniment, that I'm going to be present with you non-judgmentally for as long as you need me to be present. And it's a great joy to do that work. And to show up at harm reduction conferences and provide ritual space and spiritual care space. We go to Drug Policy Alliance conference. We've been at the National Harm Reduction Conference. We do regional conferences. So I think there are those things. And I think when we go into churches and we try to have a conversation about how you can really be a safe space, it's not just checking a box. It's like really changing your orientation towards recognizing that so much of the language that we use in the United States really is theological malpractice. That is where it's coming from. And we do have a program at Faith and Harm Reduction called the Alliance, and the Alliance is a way for people to basically have a designation like this is a safe church. So if folks are interested in that, it's on our website. But I think the education takes a long time, and you have to work with churches who have capacity to get anti-racist work, to understand that the war on people who use drugs was intentionally racist, is intentionally racist, that have a critique about carcerality and are moving towards abolition and understanding that that is work that Christ would call us to do, and understanding this stuff about defilement. So it's a lot of elements in there. And it's not quick. It's not quick, but it's important. And so could get into like lots of the specifics, but I want other people to be able to talk. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, that's a lot of when you were talking. I mean, I see holes in what we're doing. So again, thank you. And again, for us, we really built off of the project that took off on college campuses around being able to do some education and training and let folks know, that these were safe people and safe spaces. So I think about like the high schools that, the teacher has their lanyard lets them know that they are a safe person for somebody in the LGBT community, or having stickers. And so I had the good fortune of working with a colleague who's very involved with collegiate recovery. And out of that, we developed the Recovery Ally program. And now we've gone to within the church is to make Recovery Ally trainings for faith communities and faith leaders. And that has been, with the exception of that carceral piece. So again, thank you, has been very successful. And churches can earn their little emblem and put it out there, letting people know that this is a safe place. Much like on our doors at SpiritWorks, we've got our Recovery Ally and Faith Recovery Ally sticker, and our "You can get naloxone from here" sticker. But really being able to put that right out. We put our stickers on our computers as we're going here and there. People will ask me when I'm on an airplane. It's like, well, what is that, and what does that mean? So being able to, and I learned that from the community. So it wasn't like it's Jan Brown's big idea. A lot of the folks who we were serving would say, when they were trying to find jobs or find people to help them, that they would look for that Christian emblem of the fish, because those people were supposed, I mean, it's like they're supposed to help us. And it's like, okay, so if we give people something to look for, to let them know and to be able to identify us as folks who can be helpful. And you're right. I mean, it's long, slow work. And yet we've made some pretty fantastic relationships We've seen, churches that we might not have thought would have gotten behind this work, do so. This group that I was telling you about earlier out in Southwest Virginia, they are excited and on fire to be able to utilize some of those strategies. Um, you know, Prior to this administration, there was a lot of effort being made to have an office of faith within state government. I know we have something in federal government. It scares me, and yet, being able also to leverage things when they do exist, right? I mean, but I have gotten to go years ago. I can't imagine doing it now, but I use Michelle Obama's quote a lot. It's hard to hate up close. And so, when I get asked to do something, more than likely I'm going to go and do it. Because I want to be able to change, just by my face and voice, be able to change things, and have had good success being able to do that. And so I think that visual piece of people knowing that, this is a safe person, this is an educated person, um, and it takes time. It takes time, and people in communities need, we get a lot of street cred, right? If I'm okay with the community, then anybody that I would bring to the community is okay. And so being really careful, and making sure that I have vetted the relationships. And certainly people have said, things like, I'm too protective of the folks. And it's like, yeah, but I'm okay with that. You know, whether I am or not, I'm okay with that, because, they've been hurt in ways that are not acceptable. And so if I get to have a different role, many of the stories that I tell are their stories, and so they might not get to tell their stories in ways that I do. But when people hear stories and maybe hear them over and over again and can begin to connect them with organizations and institutions that matter and that care, then change can at least begin.
I want to just from the other side, having been someone who was never going to step foot in a church other than church basements. Thank you very much. Um, uh, Ed and I first met, many years ago, and Church of the Ascension is a place that not only welcomes folks in to engage in recovery oriented care, but also really encouraged conversations with the public about the value of caring for individuals with substance use disorders, and invited experts into the space. Didn't pose like, he was the expert, but said knew enough, had enough humility to invite experts into the space to begin to educate his church, and having and promoting queer events that invited not just folks that were using drugs or in recovery from using drugs, but also to celebrate and sort of express support for those communities was huge, huge. And so that built, and that actually did, and I don't know if I've ever said this to you publicly, Ed, but thank you for helping heal my spirit with regards to the church, because I had some feelings. I had some feelings about y'all. But because
I
you,
remember.
yes, yes,
I remember.
right? So that,
Bring it
uh,
on.
that allowed me and my children, like it
Yeah.
reverberated so far beyond even just me. And I think that's what we're all talking about. Like, we can heal the body, we can heal the mind, but the spirit, the community, healing that is so needed has always been about spiritual leaders, right? Like it's no mystery that MLK was a preacher man, right? Like hello. So I think we have a legacy here. And I love what Hill was sharing about, the nuts and bolts of it goes beyond just recovery. And by the way, recovery to me means any positive change. I don't care if you're using drugs or not. It's any positive change that you decide, right, is what you want and need.
Yeah.
And if that's food, connection, whatever. So I just wanted to get that out. But to have these practical toolkits, to have these resources available, to bring people into the community who can educate, right? A lot of times folks think, well, I have to be the one to do. No, that's the relationship piece. That's the harnessing, that's the linking up, that's the bringing the experts to the table who've been underrepresented, but will build trust and community around these issues.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm loving what you're saying because you're right. The community at Ascension is pretty outstanding. I love to say it's the first church ever to be built on Fifth Avenue, and God still has something to say on that footprint. And in addition to the things that you pointed at, we're also the only Episcopal church on the Gay Pride Parade route. And we hand out cups of ice water with lemon slices in them. Thank you very much. 50,000 cups every year. And Stephanie, you've been part of that. And it's a wonderful thing. But I want to circle back to what does this work look like? And we've had some wonderful input so far. Hill and Jan both said brilliant things that I kind of just want to tag onto real quick. The nuts and bolts piece and the time intensivity of this kind of work and recovery of not just individuals, but systems of care. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like at Church of the Ascension, kind of a lot like what Stephanie was talking about. And, we have 12-step meetings every day but Sunday. In fact, we in the last year or so, we reinitiated a SLAA meeting in the chapel on Saturday mornings. And no, I'm sorry, Wednesday at noon that happens. Saturday mornings, there's a group in the chapel that's, I think, an AA group, but they've turned into a meditation group, which is like super cool. But as I said, maybe before everybody got here, I was talking to Stephanie and Rachel about how there's been a huge uptick in injection drug use on the side streets on either side of our church. And me being clergy liaison to the 6th Precinct, I've been very involved with trying to make sure that the police are aware and trying to get as much of a helpful response as possible. On the occasions when we have had contact with the police, we have found that they're actually very, very caring. And I think that is an outgrowth, at least in part, well, not only just the neighborhood of Greenwich Village is different than the South Bronx, that's for sure, but our relationship sort of sets the tone with some of the ways that they provide care for us. However, I took the idea of maybe using our worship space as a safe space for, I guess, injection drug use rather than being out on the street. I took that to my boss, the rector of Church of the Ascension. It didn't even go any further. And that's my whole point, is that's what this work looks like sometimes, is you plant a seed or you float an idea, and it doesn't really land in a, yeah, sure, let's do this kind of way because of this sort of unconscious scapegoating thing that, oh, no, the people in this community would never be comfortable with that sort of thing. My suspicion is that could be just a first volley of conversation, and that the possibility for movement beyond that, knowing all these other infrastructural elements of care are in place. I think that those of us that want to be engaged in this kind of work are 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 served by being mindful of the fact that, sometimes when you ask, can we do this? And you're told no, that's just part of the process. So that's kind of what I wanted to offer, because that, I think, is what recovery looks like in many, many ways.
Thank you so much, Ed. I want to be mindful of our time. There's one more question in the chat um, by Maddie. If you all are comfortable staying for a couple more minutes, and if not, please feel free to bounce. But Maddie asks, how can I be a better ally to people beginning their recovery journey who may feel resentment toward the church? Faith has been an important part of my own recovery journey, but I recognize that not everyone shares that experience. I want to be as welcoming and inclusive as possible. When someone is just beginning their recovery and may have strong negative feelings about religion, how can I start the conversation in a way that's supportive without making them feel alienated?
Um, I think so. When I worked in a syringe exchange for 5 years, that was not a faith-based exchange. I had been in ministry for many years prior to it. Um, no one at the exchange that I ever served knew that I had a history in ministry. Behind the scenes, churches were funding the exchange, and I was going into churches and doing the theological spin and getting them to write checks, but participants didn't know that, and they didn't know what I had done before. And I really value the statement, evangelize always, and when necessary, use words. Um, that my hope was that the way that I showed up trying to live the principles of harm reduction, which I think are really closely aligned to Christian principles of being non-judgmental, of non-coercive, of meeting you where you are, of listening intently, caring about your health, being present to you, that you could see that I was doing something that was connected to spirit, and I didn't need to tell you. And I think that's the way that we welcome folks back in, is that we act in ways that clarify that we're in alignment with what is good and kind.
It's interesting because so I I started SpiritWorks before I became a clergy person, and one of the questions that I was asked as I was going through the ordination process was around, why is it important for me to be ordained, and why is it important for me to wear a collar? And my response was that the people that I work with know that I love them. I want them to know that God loves them. And over time, and so does the Episcopal Church, but it was certainly, and so then I'm in the church. I mean, I go back and forth quite regularly, and my spouse and other staff member here does so as well. Um, and sometimes it's trickier than others. I mean, there are times when I'm in the SpiritWorks Center and I have my collar on. Folks know that we are not here to proselytize or do conversion or any of those kinds of things. But they get to see a side of Christianity that is sometimes not what they learned. And so it's always quite a surprise. It's like, gosh, you guys are like cool Christians, or and so that has I can't, I mean, I'm sure it has been a problem for someone somewhere along the lines. I mean, and the name of our organization is SpiritWorks, for Pete's sake. And getting to even tell that story is always quite fun. Because it didn't come from the church side. It came from being in church basements, saying it works if you work it and it doesn't, don't, won't if you don't, right? And so somebody asked me, or one day, it's like, well, what is it? And for me, it is spirit, and spirit works. And so we've had really good success just letting people know that we love them and God loves them too. Um, Kind of globally. And then we have, in our space, we have access in many different ways. I mean, we've got, all the flags of the major religions, and we've got, pictures. So just all kinds of different images that let people know that, whoever you are, wherever you are, you're welcome here. And by extension, we welcome you also. And, I think of, I mean, Hill, when you were talking, I'm like, amen over here, because it really is about, I think harm reduction is the work of the church. I mean, I think that's who we are, when it gets right down to it. I mean, and I think as we can help people really recognize that that is our intersection and that is our superpower, if you will, that gosh, the church can really do great things when we are truly grounded in the theology that we say we practice. So yeah, and Stephanie, for me, my definition has really changed. Recovery is one more day, because we can equally not make it. And it gets back to what you all were talking about before about reoccurrence and where's the space for somebody when we're only looking at abstinence.
Yeah, I love that. And just really quick, I think there's a real opportunity, and Rachel and I had talked about this before we came together as a panel. There's a real need for this movement, um, because what the Spirit does is bring together all these different communities, and communities that are hurting, communities that are really hurting. Um, and so there's a real opportunity. Ed, you're fierce. When Ed was talking about bringing a overdose prevention center into the church, girl, girl, like let's not just go from 0 to 5. Let's go 0 to 100, baby.
Well, somebody's got to ask.
Right? But here's the thing, here's the thing, and Hill can maybe back me up on this. What would it be like to get a safe syringe exchange, right? Like when we were starting off in ActUp, we did cute things like get condoms into places, and we flavored them, by the way. Mwah, right? Because who wants a boring, non-flavored condom, right? But we created these fun ways of reducing harm, of like, and engaging and making it fun for the community, right? And I think, there's opportunity, Ed, to connect with people like Hill who are and build a sort of a network, right? And Jan, right? To build a network where you're creating the organizational infrastructure so that we're not just alone in our little, microcosm, but that we're building these healing spaces, that can also give us the support, because this is hard work. This is hard work, right? We get exhausted. We get, we feel, defeated sometimes. And to be able to create a network of these spaces where we can help each other is, and I know I'm, Rachel, probably skipping into the next part of the conversation, but I think this is where the crux is. Let's not just stop at this conversation. Let's not just stop here. Let's keep moving. This is a first of many.
And just one really quick point relating back to the question, how do we help people who might have some kind of barrier in their thinking when it comes to faith communities? And I think it can be deceptively simple sometimes, which is just like, in any part of life, we show up and we express our interest in who they are and be present and abide, in ways that allow them to feel their way into what I love to call the big three when I'm in the pulpit, feelings of safety, belonging, and being loved. And that's a very effective measure or means of guidance for us who are representatives of faith community. Just, being present in that totally accepting way, or accepting is even the wrong word, implies that there's something to be accepted somehow. It's just being present and being interested in who people are.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, I won't attempt to say anything better than you said it because I don't think I could. We've gone about 10 minutes over, and I am so grateful to people for hanging on. Um, and yeah, I suppose, you know, in conclusion, I want this to be the first of many steps forward, and I hope this conversation helps lay the groundwork for building a stronger network, like, a real infrastructure of community care and collaboration across, faith, recovery, and LGBTQ um, spaces. And I have to shout out. So my brother has been here the whole time, and our relationship was not always great with regard to my sexuality. And he is a living, walking, breathing, loving testament to the wonderful things that can come from people spending time with one another and taking the opportunity just to spend time and see. And yeah, I love him a ton, and I'm stoked that he's here. So yeah, and I hope that we can replicate that moving forward in community. So thank you all so much for being here, all of the panelists, all of the audience members, and for the questions. And there were a couple really interesting resources that were dropped in the chat too. So for anyone who's interested, please check those out. Yeah, I'm hoping, we can establish this as a fairly regular thing. And I will be reaching out to all of you about that. And if anyone has closing remarks that they would like to make, please go ahead, and I will stop talking. So
Thank you for the work you're doing. God bless you.
Thank y'all.
All of us.
Yeah.
Oh, and is there any way to get the resources that are in the chat shared with us via email or something?
yeah, definitely.
All
Definitely.
right,
Mm.
that'd be helpful. Because I have to go immediately into another meeting, so I'm
Yeah,
not going to
no
be able
problem.
to.
Love you all, to the folks doing the work and to the allies. So much gratitude.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
and thank you, Rachel, for bringing us all together, and certainly the O'Neill Institute and Regina, and the fact that this gets to be your work is thrilling to me. So thank you for bringing us to this
If you
place.
can't be clergy, do this.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. Thank you, Stephanie, Ed, Hill. Appreciate you all endlessly. And I will email recordings out to anyone who wants one. So just let me know.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right.
God bless.
Bye,
Thank you.
y'all.
Ciao, bacio.